Well, welcome everybody. This is a great opportunity to be together. This is the first go around of a new series of trainings that I'm offering to all of our wonderful Brookdale volunteers as well as agents of hope who are serving in healthcare, education, addictions ministry, counseling, church, parachurch, community service, people all over the spectrum of service who are out there spreading hope and encouraging lives. This is a near and dear desire of mine to encourage you all to provide relevant training, to get people from various different contexts together so that we can share with one another and find out more about each other and see what we can do to spread a little hope into this world. So I hope that if you had a chance ahead of time to get the slide presentations, that you've got those in front of you. I'll also provide a link to those in a follow-up email, as well as a link to view this recording for whoever may want to watch it at a later time. Throughout today's presentation, I'll be pausing for some time to chat. I'll also be sharing my screen so that you all can see that. And if you have a question that you want to put in the chat box, we'll have that for those of you that are on computers. For those of you that are on the phone, we'll unmute the line and offer opportunities for questions and discussions along the way. So without further ado, welcome to Hope in the Soul, the role that hope plays for those facing serious illness. This is based upon the book Anatomy of Hope. I already noticed the first typo of the day. I put Anatomy of the Soul in my slide presentation, but it's the book Anatomy of Hope by Dr. Jerome Groopman. So I'm going to share my away we go. All right, so this is the first of what I'm calling a soul series of webinars and discussions with all of you agents of hope out there. And again, the goal of this is to help you keep your soul, help you keep mentally, spiritually, emotionally souled up, fueled up, so you can continue to care for those who you're serving. Some of you are volunteers, some of you are doing this type of work as a profession, as nurses, as social workers, as counselors, as chaplains, as CNAs, as Sunday school teachers, as pastors, ministers, police officers, the whole bit. So this is for all of you. I want to begin by focusing on the need for flourishing hearts. If we're all to provide hope into this world, if we're all to encourage faith, hope, and love through our unique special services, we need to be fueled up in our own hearts. And so I found that there are three hopes that we all need for flourishing hearts. The first is casual hope. Casual hopes are the wishes or casual desires of our heart. It's for our heart to make sure that our heart is still beating and that our soul is still alive. This is just the casual hope that it doesn't rain today or it doesn't snow later on today. The casual hope that traffic isn't going to be terrible as I'm trying to make my way to work. The hope that your favorite television series is going to be renewed for another season. The hope that your car light isn't going to cause you great difficulty and lots of money when that check engine light turns on. And then we all need something beyond just casual hope to flourish. We need precious hope. Precious hopes are far deeper in our hearts, and they tend to fuel our most earnest prayers, writes John Eldredge. So a precious hope might be for a loved one facing a serious illness. Oh, I hope that my brother's test results come out negative, that the cancer has gone into remission. I have a precious hope that my child isn't going to face the troubles of bullies on the playground. I have precious hope that my dreams will come true and the dreams of my loved ones are going to come through. And I pray about these things. These things lead me to prayer for myself and for others. And then the third hope is ultimate hope, that these are life and death hopes, true ultimate hope has the power to destroy your heart if it's left unfulfilled. You know, life and death hopes might be not just for an illness to go into remission, but for an absolute healing of that illness in a loved one's life. A life and death hope is oftentimes the hopes that we have in our faith systems and in whatever meaning and purpose we find for our lives, whether that's in God or a higher power, whether that's in nature and beauty and whatever it is that leads you to worship, that leads you to find meaning and purpose. That's an ultimate hope. And when you feel like ultimate meaning and purpose in your life isn't fulfilled, isn't fueling you up, then it has a way of really feeling like your life is left without any purpose, any hope, any meaning, and that's an ultimate hope that then is dashed. So we're going to take a look at the role of hope in healing. Dr. Jerome Groopman wrote this wonderful book, The Anatomy of Hope, and in his 30-plus years of clinical experience as a medical doctor, as a cancer researcher, and working with folks with HIV and AIDS, he's been with people who have faced a great deal of distress and a great deal of conflict in their life. And he's found that some people find hope in the midst of these terrible circumstances, and other people don't find hope in the midst of their circumstances. And he points out for us that hope is not optimism. It's not the power of positive thinking, as important as a positive outlook or positive thinking is. Hope isn't merely just having a positive thought. Dr. Groopman writes, hope is the elevating feeling that we experience when we see in the mind's eye a path to a better future. He also writes that clear-eyed hope gives us the courage to confront our circumstances and the capacity to surmount them. So in looking at hope and looking at the role that hope has in healing, Groopman is clear to point out that it's an elevating feeling, it's an elevating experience, and it has to do with being able to see a better future. And so hope gives us the courage to confront the current reality because we're able to see a better future in front of us. So hope is both cognitive and affective. It's both our mind and our heart. And so we really begin our time together today by asking the question, so how do hope and despair factor into the experience of healing? So we're going to look at two stories here that illustrate the absence of hope as well as the presence of hope. And these are stories of struggling with folks who don't feel like they have any hope. They don't feel like they can see a better future, as well as folks who found courage because of hope. Absence of hope. No hope or lost hope. When Dr. Groopman was just a young medical student, he was in surgical preparation, and he was rounding with an experienced surgeon who was looking in on a young woman named Esther Weinberg. Esther was a 29-year-old Jewish woman who had a diagnosis of breast cancer, and she was about to have a lumpectomy with the possibility of a radical mastectomy. As they were taking her medical history, they found out that Esther's parents had survived the Holocaust. She was the mother of 3 children, and she had a very caring husband. And in their tradition, she had only met her husband about 3 times before they were married. Their parents, the parents of her husband and her own parents, had both decided on their marriage to be prearranged, and so they found out that that was unique to their circumstances. There was something about Dr. Groopman and Esther in that moment when they first met that she insisted that he be there for her when she came out of surgery, which was quite rare because a medical student was only supposed to be seen and not heard of or heard from. So after surgery, and when they found out that it truly was cancer and they performed the mastectomy, Dr. Groopman was there in the recovery room with Esther, and Esther confided in him that my cancer is a punishment from God. Come to find out, Esther was living a hidden life. She was having an affair with her boss at work because she felt like her marriage, felt like the relationship with her husband was just lifeless, and felt like he had no true care for her, that he was just doing the duty of what his parents had expected for him in their relationship. And so Esther felt like she had lived this hidden life, and because of that she didn't feel like she had any hope, and that this cancer was truly a punishment from God. She had refused chemotherapy, had refused any preventative treatment after the surgery, and eventually, even after accepting some chemotherapy, she died at the age of 34. Really a sad story that stuck with Dr. Grootman throughout his career as a doctor. In contrast to Esther's story, we have the presence of hope. And it really raises the question, is this ultimate hope, or was this just really strong, precious hope? And it's the story of a doctor named George Griffin. And Dr. Griffin was actually an expert in stomach cancer. And come to find out, irony of all ironies, Dr. Griffin was also diagnosed with stomach cancer and found out that his treatment was had the possibility of being quite extensive. As to the nature of stomach cancer really is a grueling experience, and the treatment and the prognosis for stomach cancer is very slim. And so when Dr. Griffin found out about his stomach cancer, a number of the doctors and medical professionals rallied around him and said, well, Dr. Griffin, you know that truly in this situation, treatment of your cancer is only going to be undue suffering, and we really should focus now on palliative or hospice measures to bring your suffering into a light of comfort instead of cure at this point. But there was something about Dr. Griffin that said, no, I have the right to hope in treatment. I have the right to hope in a cure, and I want to pursue that hope in treatment and a cure at all costs. And so against all odds, Dr. Griffin began to take the treatment. He began to face the dim reality that came along with that treatment. And years down the road, Dr. Grootman was actually able to reunite with Dr. Griffin and speak to this. You know, was Dr. Griffin's faith and hope blinding him to the reality of this unnecessary suffering? Come to find out, Dr. Griffin was a devout Christian man and would recite the 23rd Psalm daily as a part of his regimen to get through his cancer treatment. And so sometimes we find that precious hope bleeds over into ultimate hope, that sometimes people's faith, that their belief in a holy, divine being that can heal them of their troubles really steps in. And it can either step in and give them strength to carry on through the treatment, or sometimes it seems like that ultimate hope steps in and blinds them to the reality that they're only putting themselves through what could be classified as unnecessary suffering. So this case was a great question for us. Were precious hopes in this cure becoming an ultimate hope worth dying for? The DNA of hope. Really, as we look at hope, it becomes quite the complex subject matter. Why do some people hope and yet others do not? I'm going to pause here and take my screen back into chat mode for a second. We're going to pause that and open it up. So you all are unmuted at this point in time. What do you think? You know, what do you all think are some of the reasons why some people hope and others don't? Let's see if the technology is working for us here. Any thoughts? Can you all still hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. Any thoughts on why some people continue to hope and others do not?
I don't know. I wonder once in a while if really hopeful people just have so much positivity and what is going on. And I wonder if someday we're going to find out that there's kind of a chemical impact on the body, that that there's a connection between their excitement about life, all the fun things they're doing, and that they just charge along and it affects them medically. I don't know.
Yeah. I think you're probably onto something, Joan. I think for a lot of people, there's something very deep in the physical, biological, mental, spiritual dynamic of it all that keeps them going, that they draw upon to find that hope. And not to say that folks who feel like they don't have hope are weak or less of a person, but sometimes the circumstances can seem so overwhelming that they just don't seem to be able to tap into the hope to fight.
Yeah. Because, you hear so often about people who are at the very end of life, but that they are waiting for that final relative to show up so they can say goodbye.
Yeah.
And then when they do, within just minutes or hours, they die. And I know that's for a few hours, but I wonder if there's some component there that is also similar to a component of people who have more of a recovery.
Yeah. Good point. It makes you wonder about all this.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen here. So we'll continue on. So as we look at these puzzle pieces of hope, we're trying to see, as we were discussing here, what does this look like? Why do some people seem to be able to hold on to hope and others don't? And one story that came up was a man named Dan Conrad. And Dan was a Vietnam veteran who was being treated for, I believe, leukemia. And as it came to find out, the medical team was actually pretty optimistic about him being able to survive his cancer. They said it's probably 50-50, if not a greater chance of survival. We've caught it early. There seems to be a lot of reason to hope here. And yet for Dan, he began to refuse all treatment. He began to refuse any possibility of taking chemotherapy, of looking at radiation, looking at anything. And Dan really was a person who saw no hope in his circumstances. And it unraveled that in the end, he had a secret fear that we'll talk to. And so one of the puzzle pieces of hope is to realize that it's quite complex. In Dan's situation, the first puzzle piece was his illness. The doctors and the medical team had to look at the illness and determine, was there the possibility of survival? What would the treatment options be? And if those options could be brought to Dan, what would that look like in his life? And then the second puzzle piece was that they had to get a hold of Dan's personal narrative. For one reason or another, Dan began to have this personal narrative that there was no hope. There was no reason to take the treatment. There was no reason to believe the doctors when they told him that they really could do something to help him. And then ultimately there was a grand narrative, even above Dan's personal narrative, that the doctors weren't tapping into until the very end, when it was almost too late. You see, Dan had a Vietnam War buddy of his that had been diagnosed years earlier of the same exact cancer. And there was wonderment about the possibility that it could have been from the chemical exposure that they had while they were over in Vietnam. And Dan had saw his warrior buddy, his fellow Vietnam warrior friend and comrade, turned into a complete weakling because the doctor's promises for his friend that sounded so similar to the promises that they were giving to Dan had turned this warrior into a weakling. And Dan could not bear the thought of being turned from a warrior into a weakling. And once they tapped into that grand narrative of the puzzle and realized that they had not addressed that in all of their time with Dan, that was the missing link into his puzzle, and that began to instill some hope and confidence in Dan that he could be put in the driver's seat. For Dan, he needed to be put in the driver's seat. He needed to be told, you have the authority and the power to stop this treatment at any point in time if you do not want to continue. Next, we see that another puzzle piece of hope is to realize that there's a biology behind hope. That if we can help people see the puzzle piece of the molecular power of hope and apply that power to their condition, oftentimes we'll see that hope truly has the same biological, physiological impacts upon the body as a pain reliever does, like morphine. So Dr. Groopman began a long journey of studying the biology of hope and found that research was being done into the chemical effects of individuals who felt like they had hope to hold on to. And so there was studies being done that certain number of people would have their brain wired and they would be monitored for the impact of what would happen when they would have to endure some minor physical discomfort, like a blood pressure cuff being squeezed extra tight around their arm, or a strong pinch on their skin, and they would measure the brain waves of what would happen after those uncomfortable circumstances would take place. And then they would measure the brain waves of what would happen when given a little bit of pain medicine before they knew that they would have those uncomfortable circumstances. And then what happened after they had measured those brain circumstances, brain waves, after receiving the pain medication, then unknown to the participants in the study, they were given a placebo. They weren't given pain medicine, but a person of the study would put on the white lab coat. They would pull out the syringe and they would say to the person, we're going to inject you with pain medicine before you have this uncomfortable circumstance done to you. And they found out that the brain waves were completely equal, and the persons did not report any pain in the uncomfortable circumstance, whether it was a pinch of a blood pressure cup or whether it was a pinch on their skin. The brain waves were the same, both with the placebo as well as with the pain medicine, and they made that mind-body connection due to hope. They had hope that the pain medicine would take away the pain when it came to the uncomfortable circumstances that they were going to experience. And the study was continued and done to folks who were facing knee surgery, dealing with asthma, as well as cancer. They were giving placebo medicine and told with great authority and great honesty by the medical professionals that they were not going to experience any pain. And they didn't experience pain. And it was similar to those who had received the true medication. So ultimately, you all as agents of hope, you all as teachers, as volunteers, as nurses, as doctors, as police officers, as pastors, as priests, as chaplains, as people of all shapes and sizes, You are here because you are advancing hope. You are bringing hope to the hopeless in very dire circumstances. And so the question we're really here today to get to is, how do we advance hope in the midst of overwhelming circumstances? How do we advance hope to these folks who are dealing with cancer? How do we advance hope to the school children who are afraid to go back to school after the unfortunate series of school shootings that happened in Florida 2 weeks ago, and the countless others that have happened before then? How do we advance hope to the person who's living in poverty? How do we advance hope to the person who's facing the realities of debilitating addiction? Oftentimes when we're thinking about how do I advance hope, it can feel quite overwhelming. I don't know about you all, but there are days and weeks and months and been a lot of years in my career and working in hospice and healthcare and church ministry where I've just felt so overwhelmed, felt like I don't have anything to offer these people when it comes to what they're facing. And so I want to talk about the gift of hope. And instead of feeling completely overwhelmed and overpowered by these circumstances, I want us to ask the question, what do I have to offer when all efforts to change circumstances are over? The reality is you have a lot to offer. It may not seem like it. You may not believe it. You may doubt it. But the reality is you have a lot to offer. Dr. Grootman was working with a woman who was definitely on the hope side of the spectrum as she was facing her cancer. She was the prototypical church lady that you might have seen on the old Saturday Night Live skits that Dana Carvey did. She was in charge of her church's bulletin. She was the queen of all church gossip. She was the right-hand lady to help out the minister of her local church. And she kept the most positive and hopeful attitude. She kept her faith front and center. She kept on to her social network of friends. She kept her certain a wry sense of humor fully intact. And then at the very end, unfortunately, Dr. Grootman had to go to her and say, I'm sorry, but there's nothing left for us to do. The cancer has come back, and it's come back with a vengeance. You may only have 6 weeks to 6 months to live. And he said, I'm sorry that I don't have anything else to offer you. And she said, oh no, you have the world to offer me. Looked at her puzzled and said, well, what do you mean by that? What do I have to offer you? And she said, you have the gift of friendship to offer me, and you have been such a dear friend through all of these trials and tribulations of the treatments and the diagnosis, and you have the gift of friendship. And really that's what ultimately we have to offer. We may not have a medicine to offer, we may not have psychological interventions to offer that are up our sleeves, we may not know a prayer to pray for this person that we're with in their time of desperate need, but we have a gift of friendship. We have the gift of showing up well, I like to say. And we need to think in terms of forming a choir of voices around this person. On my screen, I have a group of children who all have their ear up to a tree, and it's as if they're listening to the stories that this great big giant tree could tell them. That's what we have to offer the people in our lives going through these difficult times, whether they're a hospice patient that you visit, whether they're a person in the ICU of the local hospital, whether they're a school child coming to you because you're a trusted teacher, you're a trusted counselor. Whatever the circumstances are, we can be a choir of voices that lead actually with the voice of listening. And that's a certain voice that we put our ear to that tree trunk and listen into the voice of the person's story that they're trying to tell us. And then we respond in unison that we are here with you. We are with you. We care about you. We love you. We are here to journey through this time with you. And we form a choir of voices together to bring the gift of hope to these people in their difficult time of need. So I want to leave a chance for more interaction. And I just came to this day with some certain questions that came to my mind. What are your impressions on the role that hope plays in the lives of the seriously ill or the seriously traumatized or the seriously disturbed in our world? What's the role that hope plays in their lives? Is there a certain story that either you heard me talk about from The Anatomy of Hope, or if you read the book The Anatomy of Hope, which story did you connect with? And then have you ever felt overwhelmed trying to care for someone? What was that like for you? It's important for us to share those experiences because we've all been overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed this week when I took an overnight shift at the hospital as an on-call chaplain, and I was overwhelmed at this gentleman's trials and tribulations that he was pouring out to me at the early hours of the morning. And I just sat there in stunned silence for most of it, wondering, wow, where is the hope in these scenarios? So I'm going to pull up my screen again here and open it up for a bit of dialogue. Seeing me now and are able to chime in. So, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? What are your questions? What are your reactions to this discussion about hope today?
Hi, can everyone hear me?
All right, we hear you, Alex.
Oh, great. Yeah, I had a question. I didn't get a chance to read the book, but did he sort of talk about like instances of false hope?
Yeah, he addressed it in terms of when someone's hope doesn't seem to match the reality of what they're going through. And he talked about how he didn't talk about it necessarily in a dangerous point of view, but he talked about it as a practitioner. He feels like his best hope is when he can bring the cognitive and the emotional together with the person. And
okay.
that he wants to bring both clear information about the reality of what they're facing and the reality of the circumstances. If they have a 50-50 chance, a 70-30 chance of survival, or a 5% or less chance of survival. And he wants to also point out that it's important to join them emotionally. Oftentimes doctors are guilty, as well as the rest of us can be guilty, of only operating with our head and not bringing our heart to the scenario. And so that's why he has become such a proponent of bringing the head and the heart to bear and trying gently not to run completely all over someone and completely bulldoze over someone who's not ready to hear the unfortunate facts of a person's condition, but to meet them where they're at, to begin to educate them on the road ahead, and to encourage them and to say, I believe in you, and I believe that there is a chance. There is always going to be that chance. There's always going to be that one person where he says that the cancer cells didn't read the textbook that says that they aren't going to respond to this treatment. And so because they didn't read that textbook and they haven't read all the studies that all of us doctors are going to do, we're still going to hold on to that 1 in a million hope that there might be something that can be done there.
Okay.
Or we're going to shift our hope to the hope for quality at the end. Instead of trying to cure these out-of-control cells, we're going to focus on the hope that there is going to be quality for the rest of your days, and we're going to focus on what that's going to look like for you and your loved ones.
Great. Thank you.
Just curious if either of you connected with any of the stories that were shared, that I shared, either Esther Weinberg or the physician with stomach cancer or the Vietnam veteran, if any of those stories connected to you all.
I didn't get a chance to read the book, but the stories you shared today in the presentation regarding the Vietnam War, I can sort of indirectly connect with that because my parents went through the Vietnam War. And whether it was my grandparents who served in the South Vietnamese military, who befriended the American soldiers, obviously war conditions are very terrible, scary, but, at least from my grandpa's point of view, prayer was the basis of hope for him, prayer, religion, family. So indirectly, just hearing his stories, I believe, that you did touch upon that as well. The book probably talked about it with, religion, spirituality, family, some type of a support structure or sort of like a belief system, regardless of denomination, can have tremendous effect on the neurological aspects of someone. So, and I think it's like a snowball effect, either positive or negative. Is negativity can snowball and get out of hand and just have people really depressed, but at the same time positivity can also have a negative effect. If you have an anchor to sort of ground yourself, I think it can be very useful for someone to cling on to that hope.
Yeah. Sharing that, Alex. I'm going to pull my screen back up here. Yeah, a lot of these questions are just questions we don't necessarily have to have all the answers to, but they hopefully encourage us to continue to seek direction. They continue to encourage us to carry forward. I loved one of the quotes at the end of the book, and I've got my copy of the book right here, so I'm going to try to find it real quick.
Out of curiosity, is Dr. Groopman, is he in our team? Have you met him or?
No, Dr. Groopman is a physician who has, I believe, worked both in California as well as over in the East Coast, and I can't recall off the top of my head if he's still based in California or if he's in like Boston or New York.
Okay.
But no, he, I've never met him. This book was recommended to me from a chaplain colleague of mine, and the book was written, I believe, in about 2005. So.
Oh, okay.
But Dr. Groopman is still practicing and still writing and still sharing of what he's learning about hope. And he says, for many who cannot see hope, their vision is blurred because they believe they are unable to exert any level of control over their circumstances.
Oh, wow.
When I encounter such patients like Esther Weinberg, I try to discover why they feel so completely at the mercy of the forces around them. Helping them find hope harks back to the two elements of the emotion that Richard Davidson discussed, a cognitive or an informational one, and an affective or feeling one, which is what we brought up in the webinar. And then later on he continues, the distillation of Sharon Walker's words comes to mind, that for a physician to effectively impart real hope, he has to believe in it himself. Even then, the stated facts and the chance of prevailing are often best articulated in more than one voice. So he is a strong proponent for that choir of hope, for bringing together all the voices of hope to impart hope, impart encouragement, impart seeing the possibility that the near as well as the distant future can be better, either in terms of physical improvement or whether it's through the insights that are gained from a change of perspective, or through the quality of life that can come from encouraging one to hold on to faith and hold on to their support system and hold on to whatever it is that they find meaning for their life. Any other questions? Any other comments? Any other things that you all that are in person would like to share? Those of you that hopefully will be watching this later and benefiting from this presentation, I'd encourage you to pick up the book if you haven't already. The book is called The Anatomy of Hope, and it can be found online through Amazon.com or other bookseller resources, and stores have it. But I'd encourage it for all of you that are interested in this topic to check out. So we'll leave it up to you all to see if you have one more question or comment or pose last thoughts for those that are joining in live right now. Well, I sure want to thank the couple of you all that joined in person, and those of you that are going to be watching this later. I would encourage you to spread the word. I just have a big heart and a desire to see all of the agents of hope that are in education and healthcare and law enforcement, in religious circles, in community service aspect, Cub Scout leaders, Girl Scout troop leaders who are out there sludging through the minus 20-degree wind chill factors to sell Girl Scout cookies. All of you are agents of hope. All of you are spreading faith to the faithless and hope to the hopeless, and restoring love to the brokenhearted. And I just would encourage you to take care of yourselves, care for your soul, keep your soul refreshed and flourishing with a healthy dose of those 3 hopes that we shared earlier. Next month, and exactly 1 month from today, on Wednesday, March 28th, I'm going to be leading another live webinar and recording it for playback later. And I want to share some practices I want to entitle Soul Keeping. I read a book a couple years ago by that title by Dr. John Ortberg, who's a Presbyterian minister as well as a PhD psychologist, and he wrote a book called Soul Keeping, Practices to Care for Your Soul. And I want to just share some insights, not just from that book, but from other resources on practices for a healthy mind, body, and spirit. And so we can really look at this issue of needing whole person self-care. So I'd encourage you to spread the word on your social media accounts, your friends, your family members that are agents of hope out there. This isn't just a Brookdale Hospice thing. This isn't just a Nate thing. This is a hope thing. And so I'd encourage you to spread the word on that. You can email me at my email address if you'd like a certificate of participation. If you need that for your resources, whether that's for state licensure or you want to share that with your folks that are a part of your team, wherever it is that you serve, I'd be glad to put your name on a certificate and send it to you. Just email me, and I will look forward to sharing that with you. Thank you again for joining us today on our inaugural Soul Series, where we looked at the anatomy of hope, hope in the soul. I hope you all will have a wonderful day and continue sharing the faith, hope, and love out there. And spread the word. Join us in March for our next Soul Series. That's it for today, you guys. Have a wonderful day, and I encourage you to continue to spread the faith, hope, and love out there. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. Yeah.